In this talk, I'm asking the question, what is evolution? And more specifically, what's the difference between microevolution and macroevolution? Let's have a look. A couple of weeks ago, we asked the question, what is truth? And we also looked at Galileo and the cardinals who refused to look through his telescope. Now, why didn't they want to look through his telescope? Because what they believed didn't really stand scrutiny. Maybe they didn't really want to know the truth, or maybe they didn't want to look at the evidence. And what about you? Do you believe in evolution? Do you believe in creation? Does it stand scrutiny? Are you happy to ask questions about it? Because surely, if what you believe is true, then it should stand scrutiny. We should be able to ask questions. Let's have a look. There are two widely accepted definitions of evolution. Microevolution basically says that within a species there's variety. And you can see that's true, and the evidence supports it. Not all rabbits look the same. Not all humans look the same. Have a look around. We don't all look the same, do we? We're all slightly different. What about macroevolution? What that says is that as a result of these small changes, you can change one species into a different species. But does the evidence support this? Well, not everyone thinks so. There's a quote by Fred Hoyle, who's an atheist and a very famous scientist. He doesn't accept macroevolution. No amount of selection will turn a potato into a rabbit. Was he right? Right, here come the cardinals. Some scientists, and some of them are quoted there, are very certain about evolution, macroevolution. Look at some of the quotes there. There's Dobzhansky, and I won't read through all of it. He basically says, if you don't believe in evolution, then you're lying. Richard Lewontin, the one at the bottom, and he says evolution, well, it's not just a theory, it's gone beyond that. It is a fact, we have to accept it. And lastly, Richard Dawkins, and he says, well, if you believe the Earth goes around the sun, which we all know is true, then you have to accept evolution is true as well. And there's a slightly more personal one by Richard Dawkins, and he says, if you don't believe in evolution, then actually you're either ignorant, stupid, or insane. Well, that's what they think. Does the evidence support these statements? Let's have a look at the evidence. When looking at the evidence, I've tried to choose the most convincing piece of evidence held up by evolutionary scientists as absolute proof that macroevolution works. And you'll find them in all textbooks. So there's the Galapagos of Darwin's finches, which he argued was an example of evolution in action. You could actually see it. The finches were changing, and they do. But it's an example of microevolution. How do we know? Well, because they're still finches, haven't changed species. And in fact, it's been found in recent years, a lot of research has been done, the finches depend on conditions. So actually it's said to be cyclical. It can go backwards. It's not macroevolution. The other one are peppered moths. And the colour of those peppered moths depend on how dirty the atmosphere is. The dirtier it gets, the darker the moths get. But again, they're still moths. And it can be reversed, it can go backwards. And there's a quote there by Michael Majorus from the University of Cambridge. He probably knows what he's talking about. And he says the basic peppered moth story is wrong. They're not. These are the ones which are held up as conclusive proof. But they're not. They don't actually support macroevolution. What else are we going to look at? In recent years, there's been a lot of debate around the idea of irreducible complexity. The idea is that if you have a complex organ, like an eye, made up of lots of component parts, which in themselves serve no purpose, then evolution doesn't support the fact that these complex organs should be made. Because the idea is that while organisms are making these component parts, they're actually at an evolutionary disadvantage. They should die out. But some evolutionary scientists have argued that, well, actually, evolution there is evidence that some of these organisms have created some component parts, but that doesn't really answer the problem, is because while these component parts may be made, they're not put together in a complex organ, and they still serve no purpose. So it's a debate which is still raging on and hasn't been resolved. But it is a good question. Where do complex organs come from? And there's another discussion there about E. coli. 60,000 generations of E. coli, but it's still E. coli. And what scientists have found is instead of progressing and becoming more complex, it's become less complex. In other words, what they found is evolution is going backwards, or macroevolution is going backwards, and there is no evidence to support it in these studies. Mathematically speaking, what are the chances of evolution, macroevolution occurring? Well, it's maybe a bit easier to understand than some of the last couple of slides. But basically, Fred Hoyle says the chance of evolution are the same chances of throwing a 6. You've got a dice, you throw a 6 once, great. Throw it twice, well, that's a bit unusual. 3 times, very unusual. Imagine having a dice and having to roll a 6 using that dice 5 million times in a row. Doesn't sound very likely, and those are the chances of evolution happening. Again, evidence which contradicts macroevolution. I'm not sure how convinced you are, so here's some quotes from famous atheistic scientists about macroevolution. Siegfried Schaerer basically says that species stay within species. They don't change from one species to another species. Richard Goldsmith is even stronger. It's impossible to form any new species. Scott Gilbert basically says, well, okay, microevolution, we accept that, but that's just adapting to the environment. We don't know where these species have come from in the first place. John Maynard Smith, things don't get the evidence, it's very clear the evidence is there, it doesn't get more complex. And then a very famous geneticist, probably one of the most famous geneticists ever, worked in the University of Sorbonne in Paris, Pierre-Paul Grasset. And he says, mutations, microevolution, do not produce any kind of evolution. And it says, if you believe in evolution, it's an unfounded supposition which is wrong and doesn't agree with the facts. These are atheistic scientists. They don't believe it. I started this talk by looking at Galileo's telescope of truth and asking the question, why didn't the cardinals want to look through that telescope? Because they weren't convinced by what they believed. Well, who are the modern day cardinals? Why is it that evolutionary scientists, or some of them at least, refuse to consider the evidence, refuse to question their beliefs? Well, here's some quotes here to help us understand. Richard Lewontin, we mentioned him before, he said that evolution is fact. But why does it have to be fact? Because his quote there says, well, if there isn't evolution, what's the alternative? The alternative is an intelligence beyond the universe, a divine foot in the door. In other words, there's a God. We can't have that. There's Pierre-Paul Grasset again. He's quite strong what he says. He says that some people, some evolutionary scientists, purposely overlook reality and refuse to acknowledge the inadequacies and the falsity of their beliefs. And finally, by Fred Hoyle, he says the alternative to macroevolution is so obvious, why isn't it widely accepted? Well, here's his explanation. The reasons, it's not the scientific evidence, it's psychological. People don't want to believe. And what about you? Do you believe in evolution? If you do, are you happy to look at the evidence? Are you happy to question what you believe? Likewise, if you believe in creation, I really hope that you're happy to look at the evidence. Does what you believe stand scrutiny? Yes, it does. The evidence is there. The evidence is clear. We can have confidence in creation. Why do I do these talks? Is it to sound clever? Well, hopefully not. The aim is to help you think. Hopefully I've shown you the evidence is clear. There is a creator. If there's a creator, what does the Bible say? That we will meet him. And that verse in Philippians says we're not just going to meet him, we will bow the knee. We will confess. Every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. Well, so what? Well, I read that, and that's a day, in one sense, I'm looking forward to. I will gladly bow the knee before Jesus and confess he is Lord. And I know there's some people in this room, and they are looking forward to that day as well, worshipping Jesus, bowing the knee before him. What a great day. But what if you don't believe? What if you're not sure about these things? The verse is clear. You will bow. You will confess. It's not going to be a great day. It's going to be a terrifying day. Please think about these things. Please take this warning seriously. There are big things at stake.